corporations bow to the might of the Hegemony Council, there exists a single unbreakable rule: never harm a human's family. The Zephyrians learned this rule too late. They thought Marcus Kane was just another refugee mechanic, scraping by in the outer colonies with his teenage
Warriors
daughter,
of the
Sarah.
Alliance, the time
They saw his calloused
must
hands,
strike now,
his worn
or our
clothes,
worlds will
his
fall.
quiet demeanor, and assumed weakness. They were wrong. What they didn't know was that 20 years ago, Marcus Kane had a different name. A name whispered in terror across 7 star systems. A name that made entire fleets change course rather than face what it represented. They killed Sarah Kane on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the Zephyrian homeworld was asking the Galactic Council for protection. By Friday, they learned why the
By
Council
the ancient
couldn't help
laws,
them.
I raise
Some
mine in
humans
judgment.
retire from war.
Let the
Others
violet
just
flame
take a
seal
break.
your fate.
Marcus Kane wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. The repair bay of his small shop on Kepler Station
Such
hummed
primitive
with the familiar
creatures.
sounds of commerce
Pathetic.
and life.
Cut their
Alien
side!
voices mixed with human chatter as beings from across the galaxy went about their daily business in the Outer Rim territory. At 45, Marcus looked older than his years. Deep lines etched his weathered face, and his brown hair showed streaks of premature gray. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of honest work, moved with practiced efficiency as he adjusted the plasma coupling on a Centauran freighter. "Dad, the parts shipment arrived," called a voice from the front of the shop. Sarah Kane emerged from behind a stack of shipping containers, her auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail. At 17, she had inherited her father's mechanical aptitude and her mother's fierce intelligence. She moved through the cluttered shop with easy familiarity, dodging hanging cables and stepping over toolboxes. "Which supplier?" Marcus asked, not looking up from his work. "Vega Industries. The good plasma cores we ordered." Sarah consulted her data pad. "Though they're asking about our credit rating again," Marcus grunted. Credits were always tight on the Outer Rim. The big corporations preferred dealing with established businesses in the core worlds, leaving independents like himself to scrape by on whatever work came their way. It was an honest living, if not a prosperous one. The shop door chimed as a customer entered. Marcus glanced up to see a Zephyrian in expensive robes examining the waiting area with obvious distaste. Zephyrians were tall, bird-like creatures with iridescent feathers and sharp, intelligent eyes. This one carried himself with the arrogance typical of his species. "Are you the proprietor?" the Zephyrian asked, his voice carrying the musical tones of his people. "That's me," Marcus replied, setting down his tools. "What can I do for you, Mr. Kethvar of House Zephyr? I require immediate service for my transport vessel. The motivational dampeners are fluctuating." Sarah stepped forward with her data pad. "We can take a look, but we're booked solid for the next 3 days. I could put you on the waiting list." Kethvar's feathers ruffled in annoyance. "You misunderstand. I need this repair completed today. My business cannot wait for your scheduling convenience." "Sorry," Marcus said mildly. "First come, first served. That's how we do business here." The Zephyrian's eyes narrowed. Like many of his species, he held strong opinions about the natural order of things. Zephyrians had been spacefaring for millennia before humans had even discovered fire. The idea that a primitive human mechanic would dare inconvenience him was almost incomprehensible. "Perhaps you fail to understand who I am," Kethvar said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "My family controls significant shipping contracts in this sector. We could make life very profitable for cooperative businesses, or very difficult for those who are not." Sarah moved closer to her father. She had dealt with enough alien customers to recognize a threat when she heard one. Marcus, however, seemed completely unimpressed. "I understand just fine," he said calmly. "You're a customer who wants his ship fixed. I'm a mechanic who fixes ships in the order they come in. Pretty simple arrangement." Kethvar's feathers flushed a deeper blue, a sign of rising anger in his species. "You dare speak to me as an equal? Your kind has been in space for barely 2 centuries. My ancestors were building star drives when your world was still cooling from its formation." "That's nice," Marcus replied, returning to his work. "Sarah, show Mr. Kethvar the scheduling pad. If he wants to book an appointment, he can get in line like everyone else." The insult of being dismissed by a human proved too much for the Zephyrian's pride. He drew himself up to his full height, nearly 7 feet tall, and spread his wing arms in a display of dominance. "You will regret your insolence, human. House Zephyr has dealt with your kind before. We know how to handle primitives who forget their place." The temperature in the shop seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus slowly straightened, setting down his tools with deliberate care. For just a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, something cold and dangerous that made the Zephyrian take an involuntary step backward. Then Marcus smiled, and the moment passed. "I think you should leave now," he said quietly, "before you say something you'll regret." Kethvar hesitated, suddenly unsure. There had been something in the human's eyes, just for an instant, that reminded him of things best left forgotten. Old stories whispered in the dark corners of Zephyrian space about humans who were more than they seemed, but pride won out over caution. "This is not over, mechanic. House Zephyr remembers its enemies." After the Zephyrian left, Sarah looked at her father with concern. "That sounded like a threat, Dad." Marcus was already back at work, his hands steady on his tools. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. Big talkers like him are usually all feathers and no bite." But Sarah noticed that her father worked with extra intensity for the rest of the day, and his eyes kept drifting to the security monitors mounted around the shop. That evening, after they had closed up and were walking home to the station's residential district, Sarah brought up the incident again. "Are you sure we shouldn't report what happened to station security?" Marcus shook his head. "Station security can't protect us from someone with connections like House Zephyr. Besides, it was just words." They lived in a modest apartment in Section C, one of the older parts of Kepler Station. The corridors here were narrower, the air recycling systems older and noisier, but the rent was something Marcus could afford on a mechanic's income. Their apartment was small but comfortable, filled with the accumulated possessions of 17 years of life together. Sarah had been just 6 months old when Marcus arrived on Kepler Station. He never talked about her mother, and Sarah had long ago stopped asking. She assumed her mother had died in some accident or illness, and that her father had come to the Outer Rim to start over. It was a common enough story among the refugees and misfits who ended up in places like this. What she didn't know was that her mother had been Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the Terran Federation's most brilliant military scientists, or that Sarah herself had been born on Titan Base, the Federation's most classified research facility, or that Marcus Kane had once been Colonel Marcus Steele, commander of the Federation's most feared Special Operations Unit. As far as Sarah knew, her father was exactly what he appeared to be, a simple mechanic trying to make an honest living in the Outer Rim. That night, Marcus lay awake listening to the station's mechanical heartbeat, the hum of air recyclers, the distant thrum of the fusion reactors, the soft whisper of artificial gravity generators. It was a sound he had grown to find comforting over the years, a reminder that he had successfully built a quiet, normal life for himself and his daughter. But tonight, the sound seemed ominous. 20 years of peace had not erased the instincts that had once made him the Federation's most effective operator. Those instincts were telling him that Kethvar's threats had not been idle bluster. He thought about the man he used to be. Colonel Steele had been a legend in certain circles, a ghost story whispered among the enemies of humanity. He had led strikes deep into alien territory, rescued prisoners from impossible situations, and eliminated threats that conventional forces could never touch. His unit, the Terran Ghosts, had been humanity's invisible sword, striking without warning and vanishing without trace. But that was another life, another man. Marcus Kane was a mechanic, a father, a man who wanted nothing more than to see his daughter grow up safe and happy. He had buried Colonel Steele so deep that sometimes he almost convinced himself that person had never existed, almost. The next morning brought no sign of trouble. Marcus opened the shop as usual, and the day proceeded with normal routine. A few regular customers brought in routine repairs. Sarah handled the paperwork and inventory, and life continued its peaceful pattern. It was just after lunch when the first sign appeared. A sleek Zephyrian courier ship landed at the station's main docking bay, and several figures in House Zephyr colors disembarked. Marcus watched them on the security feeds, noting their purposeful movements and the way they seemed to be mapping the station's layout. "Dad?" Sarah noticed his tension. "What's wrong?" "Probably nothing," he lied. "Why don't you take the afternoon off? Visit your friend Amy in the tech sector." Sarah frowned. Her father never suggested she skip work. "Is this about yesterday? About that customer?" "Just being cautious. Go on, take some credits and get dinner somewhere nice." Reluctantly, Sarah gathered her things and left. Marcus watched her go, then activated the shop's security systems and began making preparations he hadn't needed for 20 years. Hidden behind a false panel in his workshop was a small case that no one, not even Sarah, knew about. Inside were items that had no place in a mechanic's shop. Identification documents in 3 different names, credit chips linked to accounts that officially didn't exist, and a communication device that could reach certain people who also officially didn't exist. Marcus stared at the contents for a long moment, then closed the case without taking anything. Not yet. Maybe the Zephyrians would be content with making a few threats and posturing. Maybe this would all blow over without Sarah ever knowing how close they had come to danger. But that evening, as he was closing up the shop, Marcus Kane made a decision that Colonel Steele would have made 20 years earlier. He began making contingency plans. Some habits once learned are never truly forgotten. Some skills once mastered remain sharp even after decades of disuse. And some men, no matter how far they run or how deep they bury their past, can never truly escape what they once were. Marcus Kane was about to be reminded of that truth in the most painful way possible. 3 days passed in deceptive calm. Marcus maintained his normal routine, fixing ships and managing the shop, but his senses remained hyper-alert. He noticed things he had trained himself to ignore for 20 years. The positioning of security cameras, exit routes from every room, the behavioral patterns of everyone around him. Sarah seemed to sense his tension despite his efforts to hide it. She asked fewer questions than usual and stayed closer to the shop, as if some instinct warned her that safety lay in proximity to her father. On Wednesday evening, they were walking home from dinner at their favorite noodle stand when Marcus spotted the tail, a Zephyrian in civilian clothes, maintaining exactly the right distance, matching their pace too perfectly. Amateur work, but effective enough if the target wasn't expecting it. Marcus steered them down a different route, taking a detour through the station's commercial district. The tail followed, confirming his suspicions. They weren't being subtle about it, which meant they either didn't care if he noticed, or they wanted him to notice. Neither possibility was reassuring. "Dad, why are we going this way?" Sarah asked as they passed through the bazaar section. "Thought we'd stop by Jack's stall. You wanted those new circuit boards, remember?" It was a plausible excuse, and Sarah accepted it without question. But Marcus used the crowded marketplace to get a better look at their follower and spot any others. Standard surveillance protocol called for at least 3 operatives in a situation like this. He counted 4. That night, Marcus made his decision. He activated the secure communicator he hadn't touched in 2 decades and sent a single coded message to an address that might not even exist anymore. Then he began making arrangements. The response came 6 hours later, routed through so many relay stations that its origin was untraceable. Package received, courier dispatched, ETA 72 hours. 72 hours to keep Sarah safe. Marcus could do that. He had held off entire armies for longer with less preparation. Thursday morning brought unwelcome visitors to the shop. Kethvar returned, this time accompanied by 2 other Zephyrians in the formal robes of house guards. Marcus recognized the type immediately. Professional enforcers, well-trained and completely loyal to their employer. "Mechanic," Kethvar said without preamble. "I trust you have reconsidered our previous conversation." "Don't recall any conversation," Marcus replied, not looking up from the engine diagnostic he was running. "I remember a customer who didn't want to wait in line." Sarah moved instinctively toward her father, sensing the hostility in the air. The 2 guards flanked the entrance, cutting off the most obvious exit route. Standard intimidation tactics. "Your daughter is quite lovely," Kethvar observed, his predatory gaze settling on Sarah. "It would be unfortunate if she were to encounter difficulties during her daily activities. Kepler Station can be dangerous for young females who lack proper protection." Marcus's hands stilled on his diagnostic tools. When he looked up, his eyes were completely empty of emotion. It was an expression Sarah had never seen on her father's face, and it frightened her more than the Zephyrian's threats. "Say that again," Marcus said quietly. Something in his tone made both guards shift nervously. Kethvar, however, was too arrogant to recognize the warning signs. Perhaps a demonstration would clarify matters. "Guards, escort the female to our transport. He will be our guest until her father learns proper respect." The 2 Zephyrians moved towards Sarah with practiced efficiency. They had done this before, seized hostages, applied pressure to uncooperative targets. It was a routine operation for House Zephyr. They never saw Marcus move. The first guard went down with a crushed windpipe, his weapon spinning away across the shop floor. The second managed to draw his plasma pistol before Marcus reached him, but the shot went wide as precise fingers found nerve clusters that sent paralyzing agony through the alien's nervous system. It was over in less than 5 seconds. Kethvar stared in shock at his fallen guards, then at the human who stood over them. This wasn't possible. Humans were primitive, soft, weak creatures who relied on technology to compete with their betters. They weren't supposed to move like that, strike like that, kill like that. "Sarah," Marcus said without taking his eyes off Kethvar. "Go to Amy's place, now. Don't stop, don't talk to anyone, just go." Sarah wanted to ask questions, wanted to understand what had just happened, but the authority in her father's voice brooked no argument. She grabbed her bag and ran. Marcus waited until she was gone before speaking again. "You have exactly 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't kill you right now." Kethvar tried to salvage his composure, but his voice shook slightly. You cannot harm me. I am protected by hegemony law. I have diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity doesn't cover kidnapping and extortion, Marcus replied. Try again. 5 seconds. My family will destroy you. House Zephyr commands fleets, controls trade routes across 6 systems. We will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy. 3 seconds. Panic finally broke through Kethvar's arrogance. This human wasn't behaving according to any pattern he understood. He should be afraid, should be begging for mercy, should be offering compensation for his insolence. Instead, he stood there like death incarnate, completely calm and utterly terrifying. Wait, I am willing to negotiate. Perhaps we can reach an accommodation. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then reached a decision. Here's my accommodation. You and your people leave Kepler Station immediately. You never come back. You forget this place exists, and you especially forget my daughter exists. In return, I don't hunt down every member of your bloodline and turn them into cautionary tales. Kethvar wanted to rage, wanted to reassert his authority, but something fundamental had shifted in this encounter. The human's casual competence in dealing with trained guards, his complete lack of fear or hesitation, the way he spoke about hunting down bloodlines as if it were a routine task, all of it pointed to a truth Kethvar didn't want to acknowledge. This wasn't a simple mechanic. Who are you? He whispered. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Nobody important, just a father who wants to be left alone. After the Zephyrians limped away, dragging their unconscious guards, Marcus began preparing for what he knew would come next. Kethvar's type never accepted humiliation quietly. They would be back, probably with more guards, certainly with better weapons. The element of surprise was gone now. He spent the rest of the day making arrangements, booking passage on a freighter due to leave in 2 days, liquidating assets, preparing emergency supplies. It was a routine he had hoped never to use again, but muscle memory made it go smoothly. That evening he collected Sarah from Amy's apartment. She looked at him with eyes full of questions, but he wasn't ready to provide answers. We're going to take a vacation, he told her, as they walked through the quieter residential sections. Leave tomorrow morning. Visit some of the inner worlds.
You've always wanted to see Earth. Dad, what happened at the shop today? Amy said she saw security forces and ambulances.
There's some trouble with customers who couldn't pay their bills. Nothing for you to worry about. But Sarah wasn't a child anymore. She had seen the way those Zephyrians looked at her, had felt the sudden violence that erupted in the shop, and she had never seen her father move the way he had moved, with that lethal precision that spoke of extensive training and experience. Who are you really? She asked quietly. Marcus stopped walking. They were in a small plaza between residential blocks, empty except for a few maintenance drones. Overhead, the artificial stars of the station's day cycle were giving way to the dim lighting of evening shift. I'm your father, he said finally. That's all that matters. But you weren't always a mechanic, were you? Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the child he had protected for 17 years, but the young woman she had become. Intelligent, perceptive, brave enough to ask difficult questions even when she sensed the answers might change everything. No, he admitted. I wasn't always a mechanic. What were you? Someone who made sure that people like you could sleep safely at night. Someone who did things so others didn't have to. Someone who retired when he realized he had something more important than duty to protect. Sarah absorbed this revelation, pieces clicking into place. Her father's occasional nightmares, his hyper-awareness of their surroundings, the way he sometimes seemed to be listening for sounds that weren't there, his encyclopedic knowledge of security systems and weapons that had nothing to do with mechanical repair. Are we in danger? She asked. Marcus wanted to lie, wanted to protect her from the truth a little longer, but events were moving beyond his control, and she deserved to know what was coming. Yes, he said, we are. They continued walking home in thoughtful silence. Sarah processed what she had learned while Marcus planned their escape route. Neither of them noticed the small surveillance drone that followed at a discreet distance, or the coded transmission it sent to a Zephyrian ship waiting just outside the station's sensor range. By the time they reached their apartment, House Zephyr had already set their trap. The attack came at 3 a.m, during the station's night cycle when security was lightest and most residents were asleep. Marcus woke to the soft hiss of gas being pumped through the ventilation system, a classic forced entry technique designed to incapacitate targets without damaging valuable property. He rolled out of bed, grabbing the emergency respirator he kept hidden in the nightstand. 20 years of civilian life hadn't dulled his reflexes enough to matter. He was moving towards Sarah's room when the apartment door exploded inward. Zephyrian assault troops poured through the breach, wearing full combat gear and carrying military-grade weapons. Not enforcers or guards this time, but actual soldiers. Kethvar had escalated far beyond station security's ability to handle. Marcus triggered the emergency lockdown on Sarah's bedroom door, sealing her inside a reinforced compartment he had secretly installed years ago. She would be safe there long enough for help to arrive, assuming help was coming. The first soldier through the door died quietly, Marcus's hand finding the exact pressure point to snap his neck without alerting the others. The second managed a strangled cry before suffering the same fate. But there were too many of them, and Marcus had no weapons beyond his hands and whatever improvised tools he could find. He held them for almost 10 minutes, longer than should have been possible for one man against a dozen trained soldiers. But eventually, sheer numbers and superior equipment wore him down. A stun charge caught him in the chest, sending 50,000 volts through his nervous system. As consciousness faded, Marcus heard Sarah screaming his name from behind her locked door. He tried to call out to her, to tell her everything would be all right, but his voice wouldn't obey his commands. The last thing he saw was Kethvar stepping over the bodies of his soldiers, his elaborate robes splattered with alien blood. "Take the girl," the Zephyrian ordered. "Kill the father." The plasma bolt that should have ended Marcus's life never came. Instead, an emergency klaxon began blaring throughout the station, and the distinctive whine of military-grade engines filled the air outside. Through the apartment's shattered windows, the running lights of a Federation battlecruiser became visible as it moved into docking position. Kethvar's eyes widened in shock and growing fear. Federation warships didn't just appear at Outer Rim stations without very specific reasons, and they certainly didn't respond to domestic disturbances involving civilian mechanics, unless those mechanics weren't quite as civilian as they seemed. As Marcus slipped into unconsciousness, his last coherent thought was a mixture of relief and regret. Help had arrived, just as promised. But his quiet life was over, and Sarah was about to learn truths he had hoped to keep buried forever. In trying to protect his daughter from the consequences of his past, Marcus Kane had instead delivered them directly to her doorstep. The Federation medical bay hummed with efficient activity as Marcus slowly returned to consciousness. The first thing he noticed was the absence of pain. Military-grade medical nanites had repaired the damage from the stun charge and were now working to counteract 20 years of accumulated wear from manual labor. The second thing he noticed was the figure sitting beside his bed. Admiral Helena Cross looked exactly as Marcus remembered her from 2 decades ago. Despite the passage of time, her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was immaculate, and her pale blue eyes missed nothing. She had been his commanding officer during the last years of his active service, and one of the few people who knew the real reason behind Colonel Marcus Steele's sudden retirement. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly. "It's been a long time." "Helena." His voice came out as a croak, dry and unused. "Sarah? Is she... Your daughter is safe?" "He's in protective custody aboard the Valkyrie. Unharmed, though understandably confused and frightened." Cross leaned forward slightly. "We need to talk." Marcus tried to sit up, wincing as muscles protested the movement. The nanites were doing their work, but they couldn't erase 2 decades of deliberately suppressed reflexes and conditioning overnight. The Zephyrians, in custody, all of them, including Kethvar, though he's demanding diplomatic immunity and threatening to file complaints with the Hegemony Council. Cross's expression darkened. "He made the mistake of trying to intimidate my boarding party. Seems he didn't realize that attacking a Federation citizen on a neutral station constitutes an act of war under current treaties. You're going to cause a diplomatic incident over a mechanic and his daughter?" Cross studied him for a long moment. "Marcus, do you really think I mobilized a battlecruiser for a mechanic? The moment your emergency beacon activated, every alarm in Federation command started screaming. Did you forget who you used to be?" The memories came flooding back with painful clarity. Colonel Marcus Steele, commander of the Terran Ghosts, humanity's most classified military unit, the man who had penetrated the Hegemony's most secure facilities, who had eliminated threats that conventional forces couldn't even detect, who had kept humanity safe from enemies that preferred to work in shadows, the man who had walked away from it all when he discovered he had a daughter. "I've been retired for 20 years, Helena. I'm nobody now."
"Nobody?"
Cross pulled out a datapad and began reading. "Let's see. Operation Dark Star, where you infiltrated a Hegemony weapons facility and prevented them from developing planet-killer technology. Operation Ghost Dance, where you rescued 200 human prisoners from a Vorthan slave camp. Operation Final Cut, where you assassinated the Hegemony's chief military strategist and ended their expansion into human space." She looked up. "Should I continue?" Marcus closed his eyes. "That was a different life, a different man."
"Maybe."
but that different man's actions are still protecting humanity today. The hegemony's current non-aggression treaty? That exists because they're too afraid of the ghost to risk open warfare. Half their security protocols are designed around preventing another infiltration like the ones you pulled off. And now they know where to find me. Now they know where to find Marcus Kane, mechanic and father. The ghost is still classified at levels so high that most of the Hegemony Council doesn't have clearance to know he ever existed. Cross set down the datapad, but that protection only extends so far. When House Zephyr attacked you, they crossed a line. We can't let that stand. What do you want from me? Nothing. Everything. I don't know yet. Cross stood and walked to the medical bay's viewport, staring out at the stars beyond. The galaxy has changed since you retired, Marcus. The hegemony is stronger, more unified. They've been pushing boundaries, testing our resolve. There have been incidents, human colonies raided, merchant ships seized, diplomatic personnel harassed. Nothing big enough to justify a military response, but enough to show a pattern. And you think my little dust-up with the Zephyrians is connected? House Zephyr is one of the hegemony's oldest and most influential families. They don't move without approval from the Council. The fact that they felt confident enough to attack a Federation citizen suggests they believe we won't retaliate effectively.
Marcus sat up properly, ignoring the protest from his still healing body.
Or they're testing to see if the ghost is really retired. That's what I'm afraid of. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Cross activated the room's communication system, and Sarah's face appeared on the holographic display. She looked tired and frightened, but unharmed. Dad, are you okay? The doctors wouldn't tell me anything except that you were healing. I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you holding up?
Confused mostly?
Everyone keeps calling you Colonel and treating me like I'm some kind of VIP. What's going on? Marcus glanced at Cross, who nodded slightly. There was no point in maintaining the deception anymore. Do you remember when you asked me who I really was? I told you I was someone who made sure people could sleep safely at night. That was the truth, just not all of it. Over the next hour, Marcus told his daughter about his real past. He explained about the Terran Federation's black operations, about the enemies that threatened humanity from the shadows, about the missions that couldn't officially exist. He told her about her mother, Dr. Elena Vasquez, and how they had met during a joint operation to stop a hegemony biological weapons program. Sarah listened in stunned silence as her father revealed a history that sounded more like science fiction than reality. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. So you're basically a space ninja, she said finally. Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. I suppose that's one way to put it. And Mom was a scientist working on classified projects? The most brilliant person I ever met. She would have been so proud of who you've become. Why did you retire? Why give up all that importance? Marcus looked across, then back at his daughter. Because you existed. Because being your father was more important than being anything else. After the call ended, Cross returned to her position by the viewport. She's handling this better than I expected. She's stronger than she knows. Gets that from her mother. Marcus swung his legs over the side of the medical bed. So what happens now?
That depends on several factors.
The hegemony's response, political pressure from Earth, and what you want to do. Cross turned back to face him. Your retirement was unofficial, Marcus.
Technically, you're still on the Federation's payroll, just on extended leave.
You want me to come back? I want humanity to survive what's coming. The galaxy is more dangerous now than it was when you left.
The hegemony has new allies, new weapons, new strategies, and they're getting bolder. You have other operatives, none like you. The Ghost was unique, irreplaceable. We've tried to train others to your standards, but, Cross shrugged, you can't replicate 20 years of experience and natural talent. Marcus stood, testing his balance as the nanites completed their work. His body felt different, younger, stronger, more responsive. Military medical technology had advanced considerably during his retirement. If I do this, Sarah comes with me. Not into the field, but I want her somewhere safe, somewhere I can keep an eye on her. Already arranged. There's a research facility on Titan Base where she can continue her education while being protected by the best security in Federation space. Titan Base? Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's where she was born. Full circle, then. Cross smiled slightly. So you'll do it? Marcus walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars that had once been his hunting ground. Somewhere out there, enemies of humanity were planning operations that conventional forces would never see coming. Without someone to stop them, innocent people would die. People like Sarah, who deserved the chance to live normal, peaceful lives. There's one condition, he said finally. Name it. When this is over, when the current crisis is resolved, I'm out for good. No more missions, no more emergencies, no more just one last job. I want to be Sarah's father, not humanity's sword. Cross nodded. Agreed. How long do you need to prepare? Marcus flexed his hands, feeling strength and dexterity that had been dormant for 2 decades flowing back into his muscles. The nanites had done more than heal his injuries. They had restored his body to peak operational condition. How long before we reach Titan Base? 6 hours. Then I'll be ready in 5. Marcus turned from the viewport, and Cross saw something in his eyes that had been missing for 20 years. The cold, focused determination that had made Colonel Steele the most feared operative in the galaxy. The ghost was waking up. Later in the ship's secure communication center, Marcus sent a message to an encrypted address that had remained dormant since his retirement. The response came back within minutes, bounced through relay stations across half the galaxy. Package delivered. Old friends eager to resume correspondence. Network status. Active and waiting. Marcus smiled grimly. The Terran Ghosts had been officially disbanded 20 years ago, their members scattered across civilian lives and legitimate military postings. But bonds forged in the crucible of covert warfare didn't break easily. When their commanding officer called, they would answer. In another part of the ship, Sarah Kane sat in her guest quarters, trying to process everything she had learned. Her father wasn't just a retired soldier. He was a legend, a ghost story that enemy children were told to make them behave. Her mother hadn't died in some mundane accident. She had been murdered by enemies of the state while working on projects that could save or damn entire worlds. And she herself wasn't just a mechanic's daughter from the Outer Rim. She was the child of 2 of humanity's greatest heroes, inheritors of a legacy she had never known existed. The revelation was overwhelming, terrifying, and oddly liberating. For the first time in her life, Sarah understood why she had always felt different, why she had always known there was something her father wasn't telling her, why she had inherited mechanical aptitude far beyond anything she should have learned in a simple repair shop. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. The display showed her father's face, but something was different. Gone was the mild-mannered mechanic she had known all her life. In his place was someone harder, more focused, radiating an authority that seemed to bend the very air around him. Sarah, we need to talk about what happens next. You're going back to being Colonel Steele, aren't you? For a while, until this situation is resolved. And I'm going to Titan Base for protection. For education. And yes, protection. Marcus leaned forward slightly. I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Sarah thought about everything she had learned. Everything that had changed in the space of a few days. Her father was a legendary operative. Her mother was a war hero. And she was about to be thrust into a world of classified projects and covert operations that most people would never even know existed. It should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself oddly excited by the possibilities. I trust you, Dad, but I have one condition. Marcus raised an eyebrow, unconsciously mirroring Admiral Cross's earlier expression. What's that? When you're done saving the galaxy, I want to know everything. All of it. No more secrets, no more half-truths. I want to know who my parents really were. Deal. As the communication ended, both father and daughter began preparing for the next phase of their lives. Neither of them realized that their troubles with House Zephyr were far from over, or that Cathavar's attack had been merely the opening move in a much larger game. In the depths of hegemony space, ancient powers were stirring. The ghost return had not gone unnoticed. And there were those who remembered old grudges, old fears, old promises of vengeance. The war that Marcus Steele thought he had ended 20 years ago was about to begin again. Titan Base had grown considerably during Marcus's 20-year absence. What had once been a modest research facility hidden in Saturn's largest moon was now a sprawling complex that housed some of humanity's most advanced scientific and military projects. The familiar corridors brought back memories Marcus had tried to bury, memories of briefings that never officially happened, of missions that would never appear in any historical record. Sarah walked beside him through the base's civilian sector, her eyes wide with wonder. Growing up on a frontier station, she had never seen technology this advanced or security this comprehensive. Every surface seemed to hum with barely contained energy, and the personnel they passed moved with the purposeful efficiency of people working on projects that could reshape the galaxy. "This is where I was born?" she asked, staring at a holographic display that showed the base's complete layout. "In the medical wing," Marcus confirmed. "Your mother was working in the biodefense laboratory just 2 levels down from here. We had quarters in Section 7, though I wasn't there much during those final months." Final months? Marcus stopped walking. He had promised Sarah complete honesty, but some truths were harder to share than others. "Your mother was assassinated 3 months after you were born. A hegemony infiltrator made it past base security and poisoned her while she was working late in the lab. I was off-world on a mission when it happened. The pain in his voice was raw despite the passage of 20 years. Sarah reached out and took his hand, offering what comfort she could. Is that why you retired? Because you couldn't protect her?
Because I realized I had been fighting the wrong war.
Elena died while I was off playing Ghost in some forgotten corner of space, hunting enemies who would never be more dangerous to me than losing the people I loved. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I swore that would never happen again. They continued through the base until they reached the guest quarters that had been prepared for Sarah. The rooms were comfortable but clearly designed for long-term occupation. This wasn't a temporary shelter, but a place where she could build a new life while her father returned to his old one. Admiral Cross arranged for you to audit advanced engineering courses, Marcus explained. The instructors here are the best in Federation space, and you'll have access to technology and resources that don't exist anywhere else. And you'll be gone how long? I don't know. This kind of work doesn't follow schedules. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking tired. Sarah, I need you to understand something. The man who's going to walk out of this room isn't the father you've known for 17 years. He's someone harder, colder, more dangerous. He has to be, because the people he's hunting won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way. Will I still be able to talk to you? When possible. But there may be periods where communication isn't safe or practical. Marcus stood and pulled her into a hug.
I love you, sweetheart.
Everything I've done, everything I'm about to do, it's all been to keep you safe. An hour later, Marcus stood in Admiral Cross's office, wearing a uniform he hadn't put on in 20 years. The black fabric seemed to absorb light, making him appear more shadow than man. His rank insignia had been updated to reflect his return to active duty, but his unit designation remained classified at the highest levels. The hegemony's response has been predictably swift, Cross reported, activating a holographic display that showed recent intelligence reports. House Zephyr has petitioned the Council for immediate military action against the Federation, claiming we committed unprovoked acts of aggression, and the Council's response? Mixed. The younger members are calling for retaliation, but the older ones remember what happened the last time they provoked humanity too far. There's been emergency session after emergency session, but no consensus yet. Marcus studied the intelligence reports, noting patterns and connections that would have been invisible to conventional analysts. 20 years hadn't dulled his ability to see the bigger picture in seemingly unrelated events. This isn't about House Zephyr's wounded pride, he concluded. Someone's using them as a pretext for something larger. My thoughts exactly. The question is what, and who's behind it? Any word from the network? Cross smiled slightly. Your old team has been remarkably eager to return to active duty. Agent Phantom reports from Borthan space. Agent Wraith has established contact from the hegemony core worlds, and Agent Spectre is already en route from the outer colonies. It's like you never left. The Terran Ghost had been Marcus's hand-picked team of operatives, each one carefully selected for unique skills and absolute loyalty. They had worked together for over a decade, becoming more than colleagues. They were family, bound by shared secrets and mutual trust that went deeper than blood. What's our operational status? Officially, you're investigating isolated incidents of anti-human sentiment in hegemony space. Unofficially, you have carte blanche to do whatever it takes to prevent a war that could destroy both civilizations. Marcus nodded. It was the same authorization he had carried during his most sensitive missions. Broad enough to allow maximum flexibility. Vague enough to provide plausible deniability if things went wrong. I'll need a ship. Something fast, well-armed, but not obviously military. Already arranged. The merchant vessel Lucky Strike is waiting in Docking Bay 7. Don't let the appearance fool you. She's got military-grade shields, weapon systems that aren't in any official database, and an AI that's been specifically programmed for covert operations. Marcus started to leave, then paused. Helena, if something happens to me, Sarah will be protected. You have my word. The Lucky Strike looked exactly like what she was supposed to be. A mid-range cargo hauler, showing the wear and modification scars typical of independent merchants. Her registry claims she was owned by a shipping company based in the Centauri system, and her cargo manifest listed machine parts and agricultural supplies bound for hegemony trade stations. None of it was true, of course. Beneath her mundane exterior, the Lucky Strike was one of the most advanced ships in the Federation fleet, equipped with stealth systems, enhanced sensors, and weapons that could disable or destroy targets many times her apparent size. Marcus ran his hands over the familiar controls as he powered up the ship's systems. It had been 20 years since he had piloted anything more advanced than a maintenance shuttle, but muscle memory and enhanced reflexes made the process feel natural. "Welcome aboard, Colonel Steele," said a voice from the ship's communication system. The AI's voice was crisp and professional, with just a hint of personality that suggested extensive programming. "Call me Marcus. What's your designation?" "Athena, sir. I've been fully briefed on our mission parameters and have already plotted several potential courses into hegemony space." Marcus activated the navigation display, studying the routes Athena had prepared. Each one was carefully designed to avoid major shipping lanes and military patrols while providing maximum opportunities to gather intelligence. Recommendations? The Vorthen system would be our best starting point. Agent Phantom's latest reports suggest increased military activity there, and House Zephyr maintains several facilities in the area. Then that's where we'll go. As the Lucky Strike cleared Titan Base's gravitational field and activated her faster-than-light drive, Marcus felt a familiar sensation. The mixture of anticipation and apprehension that came with the beginning of a hunt. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, enemies of humanity were planning operations that could destabilize the entire galaxy. His job was to find them before they could act. The first sign of trouble came 3 days into the journey, when Athena detected an unusual pattern in subspace communications traffic. Military-grade encryption bounced through multiple relay stations, all originating from deep within hegemony space. "They're mobilizing something big," Athena reported. "Fleet movements, supply requisitions, personnel transfers, all at levels I haven't seen since the last major crisis 20 years ago." Marcus studied the intercepted data, looking for patterns that might reveal the operation's true scope. What he found was disturbing. "They're not preparing for a defensive action," he concluded. "This is an invasion force. Target? Unknown. But based on the force composition and supply requirements, they're planning to hit something important." Marcus activated the ship's secure communication array. Priority message to Admiral Cross. Classification: Ultra Black. The response came back within hours, routed through so many relay stations that its origin was completely untraceable. Message received. Additional assets being deployed. Execute Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7 was the code designation for deep infiltration operations. Missions that required operatives to go completely dark, cutting all ties with Federation command until their objectives were complete. It was the most dangerous type of assignment the Ghosts had ever undertaken. Marcus began making preparations for what would likely be a one-way journey into the heart of enemy territory. He updated his personal files, recorded messages for Sarah that would only be delivered if he failed to return, and performed the mental exercises that would help him maintain his cover identity under extreme stress. As the Lucky Strike approached the edge of hegemony space, Marcus made his final transformation from retired mechanic to active operative. The process was surprisingly easy, like putting on comfortable clothes that had been stored away for too long. The Ghost was fully awake now and ready to hunt. But what Marcus didn't know was that this time, he wasn't the only one hunting. Deep in the secure facilities of the hegemony core worlds, an old enemy had been waiting 20 years for exactly this opportunity. Someone who remembered Colonel Marcus Steele very well, and who had never forgotten the humiliation of being outmaneuvered by a human operative. The trap had been set decades ago, baited with Sarah's life and sprung with House Zephyr's arrogant attack. Now all that remained was to see whether the legendary Ghost could escape a web that had been specifically designed to destroy him. The war between shadows was about to begin, and this time, only one side would survive to see its conclusion. Marcus activated the ship's stealth systems as they crossed into hegemony space, beginning a hunt that would take him from the civilized core worlds to the savage frontier systems where the galaxy's oldest grudges were still nursed in secret. He was looking for clues to an invasion that could destroy everything he had fought to protect. What he would find instead was a conspiracy that reached back to the very foundation of the hegemony itself, and an enemy who had spent 20 years planning the perfect revenge against the man who had cost him everything. The Vorthen system held secrets that Marcus had hoped never to uncover again. As the Lucky Strike emerged from hyperspace near the outer planets, Athena's sensors immediately detected the massive military buildup that Agent Phantom had reported. Enemy battle fleets clustered around the system's gas giants, their ships dark and running silent. Analysis complete, Athena reported. Preliminary count shows over 300 capital ships, plus support vessels and troop transports. This is the largest military concentration I have on record. Marcus studied the tactical display, noting fleet compositions and positioning. The hegemony wasn't just mobilizing for war. They were preparing for conquest on a scale not seen since the last great expansion centuries ago. Any indication of their target?
Negative.
Fleet disposition suggests multiple possible objectives, but no clear priority. Athena paused. Colonel, I'm detecting an encrypted transmission directed specifically at this vessel. Marcus felt cold certainty settle in his stomach. Someone knew he was here, which meant the entire operation was compromised from the start. Origin of transmission? The flagship Dominion's Pride. That's High Admiral Kethmore's command vessel. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. High Admiral Kethmore, formerly Commander Kethmore of the Hegemony Intelligence Division. The Vorthan operative who had infiltrated Titan Base 20 years ago. The one who had murdered Elena Vasquez while Marcus was away, on what he now realized had been a deliberately orchestrated mission. Display message. The holographic projector activated, showing a figure Marcus recognized despite the passage of 2 decades. Kethmore had aged well, his predatory features sharpened by years of command and authority. His elaborate uniform displayed the highest ranks of military and political power within the hegemony. Colonel Marcus Steele, Kethmore said, his voice carrying the same cultured menace Marcus remembered from their previous encounters. Or should I say, Marcus Kane, humble mechanic of Kepler Station. I must confess your civilian disguise was quite convincing. It took considerable effort to locate you after all these years. The message continued without pause for response, a pre-recorded monologue designed to gloat and threaten in equal measure. I trust you've had time to appreciate the elegance of my design, how Zephyr served their purpose admirably, though young Kethvar's enthusiasm did require some guidance. The important thing was getting you back into the game and getting your daughter to a location where she could be properly monitored. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Sarah was supposed to be safe on Titan Base, protected by the best security in Federation space. Oh yes, I know exactly where dear Sarah is residing. My agents have been watching her since the moment she arrived. Such a brilliant young woman. She has her mother's intelligence and your instincts for survival. It would be tragic if something were to happen to her while you're so far away. The image of Kethmore smiled with predatory satisfaction. You have 12 hours to surrender yourself at the coordinates I'm transmitting. Come alone, unarmed, and prepared to answer for 20 years of crimes against the hegemony. Refuse, and your daughter will suffer the same fate as her mother. Unlike last time, you won't be conveniently absent when it happens. The message ended, leaving Marcus alone with his rage and the coordinates of a meeting that was obviously a trap. Colonel? Athena's voice was carefully neutral. What are your orders? Marcus stared at the coordinates, his mind racing through possibilities and probabilities. Kethmore had spent 20 years planning this confrontation, which meant he had contingencies for every likely response. A direct approach would be suicide. Calling for backup would endanger Sarah. Running would accomplish nothing except delay the inevitable. But Marcus Steele hadn't become the ghost by accepting the obvious choices. Athena analyzed the fleet composition and positioning. I need to know their operational capabilities and defensive weaknesses. Analyzing, Colonel. Are you planning to engage this entire fleet? I'm planning to end this war before it starts. Marcus began pulling up classified files he hadn't accessed in decades. Technical specifications, infiltration routes, psychological profiles of hegemony leadership. And I'm going to make sure Kethmore understands why hunting my family was the worst mistake he could have made. Over the next 6 hours, Marcus transformed the Lucky Strike from a merchant vessel into a weapon of surgical precision. He activated combat subroutines that had been dormant for 20 years, armed systems that didn't officially exist, and began downloading data packages from sources so classified that even Admiral Cross didn't have clearance to know about them. Agent Phantom, priority override. He transmitted on an encrypted channel that bypassed all official Federation communication networks. The response came back within minutes. Colonel, good to hear your voice again, sir. Agent Phantom, real name classified even to Marcus, had been his point man in Vorthan space for over a decade. If anyone could provide intelligence on Kethmore's current operation, it would be him. I need a complete tactical analysis of High Admiral Kethmore's current position and security arrangements, and I need it in 3 hours. Consider it done, sir. Anything else? Yes, contact Wraith and Spectre. Execute Protocol Omega. There was a long pause. Protocol Omega was the code for the Ghost's most extreme operational scenario. Total war against a specific target, with all limitations removed and all resources authorized. Sir, Protocol Omega hasn't been used since we stopped the last hegemony expansion. I know, Marcus's voice was cold as space itself. But they made this personal when they threatened Sarah, and they made it inevitable when they decided to start another war. As the Lucky Strike moved deeper into Vorthan space, Marcus received detailed intelligence reports from his scattered operatives. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and terrifying. Kethmore had indeed spent 20 years planning his revenge, but his focus on Marcus had blinded him to other threats. The massive fleet gathering in the Vorthan system was intended to launch simultaneous strikes against Federation colonies in 3 different sectors, overwhelming human defenses through sheer numbers and coordination. But the fleet had one critical vulnerability. It was too large to be effectively coordinated without centralized command, and that command was concentrated aboard Kethmore's flagship. Athena, can you penetrate the Dominion's Pride's computer systems? Given sufficient access, yes. The hegemony's security protocols haven't changed significantly since your last active period, but I would need to be within close range, less than 1,000 kilometers. Then that's where we're going. The meeting coordinates Kethmore had provided led to a small asteroid mining station on the edge of the system, apparently abandoned but undoubtedly crawling with hidden sensors and weapons. Marcus approached it exactly as ordered, openly, alone, and apparently helpless. What Kethmore didn't know was that the Lucky Strike stealth systems were sophisticated enough to deploy multiple decoy drones, while the real ship approached from an entirely different vector. By the time the hegemony sensors detected the approaching merchant vessel, Marcus was already within striking distance of the flagship. Beginning infiltration, Athena reported as her programs began worming their way through the Dominion's Pride's security systems. Estimated time to complete access, 27 minutes. Marcus monitored the progress while preparing for the most dangerous part of his plan. In 15 minutes, he would need to be aboard that flagship, facing an enemy who had spent decades preparing for this confrontation. Colonel, Athena's voice carried a note of surprise. I'm detecting an unauthorized transmission from Titan Base. Someone is attempting to override Sarah's communication privileges.
Marcus felt ice form in his veins.
Block it. Complete encryption. No one gets through. Too late, sir. The transmission is already active. The holographic display activated, showing Sarah's face. But something was wrong. Her eyes were too bright, her movements too controlled, her voice too calm. Hello, Dad. I wanted to let you know that I'm fine and that you shouldn't worry about me. I've made some new friends here at Titan Base, and they've been telling me such interesting stories about your work. Marcus realized with growing horror that his daughter was being drugged, probably with something designed to make her compliant and suggestible. Kethmore's agents had indeed infiltrated Titan Base, and they were using Sarah as a puppet to ensure his cooperation. I understand that you have some important business to take care of, Sarah continued in that unnaturally calm voice, and I want you to know that I support whatever decisions you need to make, even if it means I won't see you again. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus with the terrible knowledge that his daughter was a hostage and probably didn't even realize it. Infiltration complete, Athena reported. I have full access to their command systems. Execute the package, Marcus ordered. What happened next would be remembered as the Vorthan incident, though the full details would remain classified for centuries. In the span of 7 minutes, the hegemony's greatest military buildup in generations collapsed into chaos. First, the fleet's communication systems failed, isolating each ship from central command. Then navigation systems began reporting false positions, causing collisions between vessels that thought they were safely separated. Finally, the weapon systems of every ship in the fleet activated simultaneously, targeting their own support craft and supply vessels. By the time hegemony engineers regained control of their systems, over 60 ships had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair, and the invasion force was in complete disarray. But Marcus wasn't finished. Using the chaos as cover, he infiltrated the Dominion's Pride through a maintenance airlock, making his way through familiar corridors toward the flagship's command center. 20 years of civilian life fell away completely as he moved with lethal precision through the ship's security systems. He found Kethmore on the bridge, screaming orders at subordinates who couldn't restore their compromised systems fast enough to matter. The High Admiral had aged into the kind of petty tyrant that the hegemony produced in abundance, arrogant, cruel, and completely unprepared for an enemy who fought by different rules. Hello, Kethmore, Marcus said quietly. The bridge fell silent as every hegemony officer turned to stare at the human who had appeared among them like a ghost. Marcus stood in the center of the command deck, unarmed and apparently helpless, but radiating a lethality that made hardened warriors take involuntary steps backward. Impossible, Kethmore whispered. You surrendered. You came to the asteroid station as ordered. I came to end this, Marcus replied. You wanted to know what happened to Colonel Marcus Steele? You're about to find out. What followed was not a fight, but a demonstration. Marcus moved through the bridge's security personnel like death itself, disabling or killing with economical precision. None of them had ever faced an opponent with his training and experience, and their superior numbers meant nothing against skills honed over decades of impossible missions. When the violence ended, only Marcus and Kethmore remained standing. Your fleet is destroyed, Marcus said conversationally. Your invasion is finished. Your agents on Titan Base have been identified and eliminated. And your grand revenge has accomplished nothing except proving that some humans are more dangerous than your worst nightmares. Kethmore drew a ceremonial blade, his hands shaking with rage and fear. I will not be humiliated by a primitive. The blade never came close to its target. Marcus moved with inhuman speed, and suddenly the High Admiral was on his knees, gasping for air through a crushed windpipe. Elena Vasquez was worth 1,000 of you, Marcus said softly. Sarah Kane is worth 10,000. You made the mistake of thinking that made them vulnerable. Instead, it made them irreplaceable. Kethmore tried to speak, but his damaged throat could only produce strangled whispers. Here's how this ends, Marcus continued. You're going to send a message to the Hegemony Council. You're going to tell them that the invasion failed, that continuing this war would be suicide, and that the ghost is still watching. Then you're going to spend whatever time you have left remembering that you had the chance to leave my family alone, and you chose not to take it. Marcus left the Hegemony flagship the same way he had entered, like a shadow that had never truly been there. But the wreckage of their great fleet would serve as a reminder for generations that some lines should never be crossed. When he returned to Titan Base 3 days later, Sarah was waiting for him in the docking bay. The drugs had been flushed from her system, and her eyes were bright with intelligence and concern. Did you finish your business? She asked as he disembarked from the Lucky Strike. For now, Marcus replied, pulling her into a fierce hug. Are you all right? I am now. Though I think I understand why you retired from this kind of work. And why I'm retiring again, Marcus confirmed. For good this time. No more missions, no more ghosts from the past. Just a father and his daughter, figuring out what comes next. Admiral Cross appeared at the edge of the docking bay, her expression mixing relief with professional satisfaction. The reports she had received from Vorthan space read like something out of a military legend, but she had seen Marcus Steele's work before. The Hegemony Council has requested immediate peace negotiations, she reported. They're offering significant concessions in exchange for assurance that there will be no retaliation for recent events. Tell them the ghost is satisfied, Marcus replied, as long as they remember to leave humanity alone. As they walked away from the docking bay together, Sarah looked up at her father with new understanding. So what do we do now? Go back to Kepler Station? Find another outer rim world where we can disappear? Marcus considered the question seriously. The galaxy was a vast place, full of opportunities for people who wanted to start over. But Sarah deserved better than a life spent hiding from shadows. Actually, he said slowly, I was thinking we might stay here for a while. Titan Base could use a good mechanic, and you could finish your education with the best teachers in Federation space. And when people ask who we are, Marcus smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time in 20 years. We'll tell them the truth. We're Marcus and Sarah Kane. He fixes things that are broken and she builds things that have never existed before. Everything else is just history. Behind them, the Lucky Strike powered down for what would be her final mission. The ghost had returned to the shadows where he belonged, and the galaxy was safe for another generation. Some legends never truly die. They just learn when it's time to become something better. In the years that followed, the Vorthan incident would become required study at military academies throughout human space. But the most important lesson it taught wasn't about tactics or strategy. It was about the lengths that some people will go to protect the ones they love. And sometimes, that's the most powerful weapon of all.